Welcome to today's webinar, Tree and Shrub Disease Control Best Practices, brought to you by Landscape Management and by our sponsor, New Farm. I'm Joelle Harms from North Coast Media, digital producer for Landscape Management Magazine, and I will be your event manager. Before we get started, I want to let you know that today's webinar will be recorded. You are currently in a listen-only mode. The recording will be available 2 weeks from today on our website, landscapemanagement.net/webinars. A link to the on-demand recording will also be emailed to you when it is available. At this time, I'd like to acquaint you with the ways you can participate during today's presentation. Because of unexpected technical difficulties with the presentation today, we recommend you click on the link on the left-hand side of your screen to view the PDF version online as well. Please also notice in the lower left-hand corner of your console that there is a Submit button. We encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation. Just type in the text box at the bottom left, then click Submit to place your question in queue. Questions that were submitted during registration may be covered in this webinar. Some questions might also be answered in an upcoming issue of Landscape Management Magazine or in our weekly e-newsletter, LM Direct. We strive to answer as many of your questions as possible. Finally, if you experience any technical difficulties during today's event, select Help to submit your issue, and assistant producer Bethany Chambers or I will personally assist you. Now I'd like to turn today's event over to our moderator, Landscape Management Editor-in-Chief, Marisa Palmieri.
Thank you, Joelle, and welcome everyone to the first in our 2014 series of Build Your Business webinars. Today's topic is Tree and Shrub Disease Control Best Practices, and we have two great speakers lined up to cover both the technical and business sides of this service area. Also, as Joelle mentioned, we have to thank our sponsor, New Farm and Turney Fungicide, for making today's webinar possible. On the technical side today, we have Jill Calabro, Field Development Manager for New Farm, presenting common diseases in woody ornamentals. Jill has a PhD in plant pathology from Oregon State University and has been a field development manager with Valent Professional Products since 2007 and recently moved to New Farm. She specializes in fungicide development for turf and ornamentals. And on the business side, we have Andrew Keppel. He'll be presenting managing the business side of plant health care. He's the lawn, plant health care, and tree work manager for McGinty Brothers in Long Grove, Illinois. Andrew's responsible for the tree and plant health care related project management and for both residential and commercial clients, divisional training and development and strategic maintenance plans for clients. He's also an expert in disease diagnosis and hazardous tree consultation. He's an Illinois certified arborist and a certified tree care safety professional. Thank you both for participating today. We're really looking forward to what you have to say. With that, we will hand it over to Jill for her part of the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Marisa. For my portion of the presentation, I would just like to go over some of the common diseases that I observe in landscapes on woody ornamentals. The first thing I want to point out is how critical it is to really know what you're dealing with. There are a lot of diseases out there in the landscape on woody ornamental plants. There's a lot of different woody ornamentals out there, and some diseases are very specific. Some of the common symptoms to look for that you may notice is to tip you off when a plant is unhealthy and has a disease, of course. Look for things like leaf spots, leaf drop, or cankers or unsightly cankers on the trunk or a stem. And the overall results, what you'll see with the trees, you'll see an overall tree decline, defoliation. The tree will become weakened. This will be especially important in years like what we're having now in winter. When you have especially cold temperatures, weakened trees are less apt to survive these type of cold temperatures for a long period of time. Also, blooms tend to suffer if they're constantly diseased and go through these cold extreme temperatures that we're having this year. There are, as I said, there are a lot of different diseases out there on woody ornamental plants. The ones that I want to cover for my portion of this presentation are to go over anthracnose, some of the conifer blights, some rust diseases, and powdery mildews. These are some of the things that I commonly get questions about in dealing with in landscape settings. Now, in addition to knowing what some of these diseases are and what to look for, I also think it's extremely important to know what resources you have available to you. For example, really take the time to know your university extension agents and the researchers that are available to you, especially diagnostic labs, are really key. A lot of these diseases can look very similar to each other, and I always recommend that you know exactly what you're treating for so that you treat it the right way. For example, if you've got a Phytophthora problem, but you're treating it as though it's a leaf spot, you would need a different type of a product. What you'd be using would be ineffective. And so it's always important, I think, to really get to know your disease diagnostic lab that's within your area. USDA researchers are also an invaluable resource. This is a lot of, just free information that's out there for everyone to get. And finally, I want to point out that the IR4 program, which is a federally funded program that supports research to obtain registration of products, especially for ornamental plants. The IR4 program has done wonderful things for the ornamental plant industry, particularly greenhouse and nursery, but then that translates into the landscape as well. So control options out there, there are many, and that's a good thing. There are chemical control options that are available. I recommend as a landscape contractor that you go out and choose a broad spectrum fungicide. I think this is a really smart approach to take. Things such as propiconazole or Heritage, Balaton, Daconil or chlorothalonil, thiophanate methyl. I think these are all great products to have that offer broad spectrum control. And then, of course, Tourney as well, which the active ingredient is metconazole. I have to talk about Tourney a little bit. So these are all great products to have. They all have very big broad spectrum labels and can control a lot of different diseases. So the first disease I want to talk about is anthracnose. And I have a lot of pictures of sycamore anthracnose as my example, so I'll start out with that. And I was scanning through my photos for this presentation, and I realized, wow, I really do have a lot of sycamore anthracnose pictures, so I threw a bunch of them in here. As webinars are difficult enough as it is to hold people's attention, and I'm really glad I put in a lot of pictures because at least my picture slides are coming through, so that's a good thing. But anthracnose in general, some of the signs to look for are leaf spots, such as what you see here. Anthracnose on leaves, foliage, tends to be delineated by veins. It follows the vein line. And you can kind of see that a little bit in that picture. Here we go. We'll go back to that there. And then in this picture, it's a little bit darker. It's a little bit harder to see. This is, again, a sycamore anthracnose, but it's following the vein patterns. And then overall, what happens in time if you have a tree that is repeatedly not treated for sycamore anthracnose control, this is the overall appearance that you'll have, a very unhealthy looking, unaesthetically pleasing tree. This happens to be in a parking lot. It was set up for failure in the first place, but then when you get anthracnose on top of that, it just really does not look good. Some of the key things to know about anthracnose are that anthracnose is a general term. The root of the word actually comes from Greek origin that means charcoal, and that refers to what the leaf lesions look like. They're kind of a matte black in appearance, just a really dark colored lesion as opposed to something like yellow or reddish or brown even. When you see darker black kind of matte colored lesions, that's maybe your first clue that you've got an anthracnose. Now, anthracnose can infect a wide variety of hosts. I've already pointed out sycamore. I think a lot of people are familiar with dogwood anthracnose. There's also anthracnose on oak and maples as well, many others. And anthracnose can cause foliage infections. It can also infect stems. It can infect fruits in some situations. With anthracnose, infections usually begin in early spring, so hopefully soon we'll start to have to worry about this. And what you'll see is a rapid wilting of leaves, and then those leaf spots too. Often the early symptoms are easily confused with frost damage, and again it's because it has that black matte color, again that kind of think of charcoal. And foliar infections, if they're bad enough, they can spread to cause stem cankers. And I do have a picture of what that looks like too, again on sycamore. And at this stage the disease is pretty well established, and I would consider it to be pretty severe. Some more thoughts about anthracnose development. Temperature greatly impacts how this disease progresses. The 2-week period following leaf emergence is the most critical time to think about protecting leaves from anthracnose. Greater disease intensity has been observed. Temperature ranges of about 55 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Again, think of kind of early spring. And this is when fungicide sprays should be targeted. Again, you want to protect those early leaves that come out. Oftentimes, a second leaf out can occur in June, especially if that first set of leaves is dropped because of infection. So if that happens, then another application would be required again in June, because you still need to protect the new foliage that comes out, and especially if cool, wet weather is persisting into June. I know this is a problem up in the Pacific Northwest area. This can happen in many years. So much out east, it's less of a problem to worry about that June time, but again, you really got to focus on those early spring applications with anthracnose and protect those leaves. And occasionally 2 sprays will be needed. Okay, now I want to go ahead and talk about conifer blights. I have a lot of slides here with conifer blights, and that is because conifer blights are caused by many, many different pathogens. They're often known as either needle casts or needle blights. They can cause cankers, and of course the common thread is they're all on conifers or evergreens. It's difficult in a forum such as this, with the limited time that I have, to really get into any detail about a disease cycle or typical symptoms to look for. So what I try to do is go through and pull out some of the more common conifer blights and just show some pictures of those and talk about some overall things that you could look for. Because again, with conifer blights, they can be treated differently, and I do recommend knowing what conifer blight that you're treating for. For example, I'll start out with Diplopia. This is a very severe disease on pine, especially Austrian pine. It can also occur on Douglas fir and some of the spruces. Typical symptoms of Diplopia will look like this. This is on a pine, clearly, and you'll just kind of have a cluster of brown, dead, or dying needles there. And you can see little spores, a little black spore on them. It's from time to time, I believe in the fall. You can also see them on cones, too, if cones are present. This is one thing to look for with Diplopia. The next one I want to talk about is just Stroma. This is also common on pines, Austrian pine here, Monterey and out west, and Ponderosa. Stroma is the only one I didn't have a picture of in my collection, so I got this off of Bugwood. But it shows the needles really well, the needle blights to look for up close. It is very different looking than Diplopia up close when you can take a look at it. And the differences between the two would be in control. Diplopia is much more difficult to control than Stroma is. For example, Diplopia, you would need 3 to 4 applications of a fungicide. With Stroma, you could get by with 2. So again, just trying to press upon how important it is to know what disease you're treating for. The next conifer blight I want to quickly go through is just Cavatina. Cavatina is common on arborvitae, yews, cedars, and again, Douglas fir. And here is the picture I have of Cavatina. I think mostly with Cavatina you want to look for is, again, the host. That issue, if you're seeing these kind of symptoms, a tip dieback on some of the arborvitaes and the cedars, then you might want to think about Cavatina as being a possibility. The next one is Synopsis. And this is most common on junipers. It can also be seen on some of the cedars and Douglas fir. I think Douglas fir just seems susceptible so much. But mostly I see Synopsis on junipers. I've seen it a lot in nursery situations such as here. I see it out in my neighbors' plantings of junipers in their yard. Synopsis is very difficult to control. All of the Conifer Blights are. Rhizosphere, this is most common on blue spruce. White spruce is also susceptible, but to a much less extent. It does have some resistance to it, but it is still susceptible. Here is Rhizosphere. If you look really closely at the picture here, you can see rows of just these beautiful black spores, beautiful to me, yes. You can see these rows of black spores all along the dead needles. And if this is on blue spruce, this is a pretty good indicator you've got Rhizosphere. I would say this is probably the number 2 most common conifer disease, at least that I see and deal with. And then the last one that I want to go through is caucus, another disease of red pine. Also can be found on blue spruce and then hemlock as well. And here is the picture I have from of the caucus infection. I found this back in 2012. It's just kind of a wilting of the needles. They just kind of droop and then die. It can look a little similar to Diplopia, depending on the host. But again, with conifer blights, control of these diseases is very difficult, and I recommend that you always set the expectation. And keep in mind that fungicides do not cure the needles and shoots that are already infected. This is especially true if you've got a canker disease. The best thing that you can do is to protect the new year's growth. So with fungicides, again, select a broad-spectrum product, protect that new growth, and keep in mind that several sprays may be necessary. It's just the nature of how conifers grow. In general, if you're unsure of what you're treating for, which I hope you'll take the time to send off a sample for diagnostics if you're not exactly sure, target a first application around mid-May to try to protect that new growth. The second application would be necessary 4 to 6 weeks later, general, just a 2-spray program. But again, as I said, with Diplopia, that can be more challenging to control, and 3 to 4 sprays are typically needed for that. And applications of fungicides are recommended to begin at bud swell in April to really make sure that you're protecting that new growth. And then the second application 3 weeks later, and again, that third application 2 to 3 weeks later, and so on. Okay, next I want to talk about rust, some of the rust diseases. Rust diseases are really interesting. They are so complex. They're very host-specific. For example, there's a rust disease that happens on apples that's different than the rust that you'll see on roses, for example. It's different pathogens, very host-specific. Rust diseases can infect leaves, petioles, and fruit. I have a ornamental quince in my yard, and I get quince rust every year on the little quince fruits that develop. But the foliar infections are, of course, in landscape situations most problematic. They can discolor the foliage and cause premature drop and defoliation. And you'll get these beautiful rust-colored leaf spots. They're typically bright yellow. Sometimes they're orange and red centers. Galls can form. And this is another one of those diseases. It doesn't necessarily kill a tree outright, but will weaken the tree enough that subsequent perennial infections year after year after year will weaken a tree over time. And again, this will impact bloom in the case of crab apples or roses for that matter too. Now, rust biology is really interesting. This is a very complex disease that has several different spore stages. And I could go into every single one of them, and I would enjoy it, but probably might be the only one on the webinar who would enjoy that. So I'll spare you the details. The most important thing about rust biology, though, that I want to point out is that there's often 2 separate hosts. So something like cedar apple rust is pretty explanatory. The hosts are cedar and apples, whether it's crab apples or the apples that you eat, like a Jonathan or something. It has two different hosts, complex disease cycle. And then something like white pine blister rust, the two hosts are white pine and then ribes. If anybody's familiar with that historically, it's been an interesting disease. I have a lot of really neat pictures of cedar apple rust, again, because in my neighborhood we have a lot of crab apples and we also have a lot of cedars around. So these are typically what the galls look like as they overwinter on stems. That's what they would look like about now. And then hopefully if the polar vortex would ever leave and temperatures would ever start warming up and start getting rain as opposed to snow, eventually those galls will start to swell. And they'll start swelling up. They'll look like that a little bit, kind of odd looking. This is on the juniper host. I forgot to mention that detail. And then as rains continue, this picture is taken during a rain. Those galls will swell up enough, and this is one of the spore stages. I can remember growing up seeing this. I grew up in Iowa, and one of my aunts would always tell me those galls were full of worms. Well, she was a little off, but wrong, I mean. But anyway, I always thought that was interesting, but they're not worms. This is one of the spore stages. And so on the juniper host, you get these big massive spores released in early spring, and those spores are wind-blown over to the apple host, whether it's crab apple, like I said, or a backyard fruit tree apple or an orchard apple. And then it causes infection on the apple. This is also one of the stages of the disease here. I think this is probably quince rust as opposed to cedar apple rust. There's hawthorne rust, quince rust, and cedar apple rust. It's very difficult to tell them apart. I believe quince rust is the most pernicious of these three diseases and most damaging. And you can see it here. You'll get these swellings on the stem. And it's most damaging because you get these stem swellings as opposed to just the galls on the tips of the foliage tips. These stem swellings are very problematic, but they are very pretty. They're very neat to look at in the early spring. And then in severe cases, this was in 2012, you can get on the bigger stems, and then even more severe than that, you can get this type of appearance here. This is one giant mass of rust spores. It's glorious, isn't it? Yes, it can be just blown off to cause infection on the apples. It's a really neat disease. And spring 2012 is when I got a lot of these rust pictures, and because the spring in 2012 was just almost perfect for rust development. Not a lot of rain is required. You do need some rain for these type of spores to form, but when you have cooler evenings, nice warmer days, and then when it cools down at night, that's a nice temperature weather pattern for rust to develop. Now on the apple host, meanwhile, after infection has occurred, later in the summer, you'll start to see these leaf spots on apples. This is a crab apple, one of my neighbors down the street. And even later in the summer, on the underside of the apple, the leaves, you'll see this type of spore structure there on the underside of the leaves. And again, that's one of the other spore structures. It's a neat, complex disease thing going on there. So fungicide applications for cedar apple rust. Again, this is one where you need to set your expectations. The focus is to prevent disease or protect the new foliage. Of course, probably in most situations, you're trying to protect the apple foliage. So apply preventively as soon as the tissues are exposed. Curative applications are much more complicated, much more difficult, especially with rust diseases as well. Intense scouting is required, and again, you cannot cure a stem canker. However, with a curative application, though, you might be able to minimize the amount of spores that are wind-blown to the apple host. That's one possibility. I still don't recommend it just because that's a really good way of fungicide resistance occurring within rust diseases. So I think my recommendation with rust diseases is, again, treat preventively in early spring as soon as you have fully expanded leaves. And I do have, I have 2 data slides in my presentation. Here's the first, just showing control of hawthorne rust with tourney. I really like the combination of tourney and 33-36. You can lower the rate of tourney that's required and take advantage of thiophanate methyl as well. It's a nice combination. Okay, so we'll jump into powdery mildew in the interest of time so I don't go over too much more. Here's some really nice powdery mildew that I found last year. Powdery mildew is very easy to identify in the landscape. When you see this type of, powdery-looking substance on leaves, it's powdery mildew. This is a difficult to control disease just because it is such a prolific spore producer. There's so many spores produced. All that white powder is just nothing but masses and masses and masses of spores that are just windblown all over the place. Powdery mildews, again, have a wide host range, and similar to rust, they are very host-specific. The powdery mildew on lilac is different than on cherries or roses, for example. There's even a rust on dandelions. It has a wide host range, but they're all different. Some of the commonalities with powdery mildew is that they do prefer arid climates. They don't like a lot of standing water. Actually, standing water will cause powdery mildew spores to explode. It's kind of neat. That's unique. And they're most commonly observed in the fall. Some other things about powdery mildews, infections occur early in the season, as most of these diseases do, as soon as the leaves emerge. And again, so the key here is timing your fungicide applications early. Treat preventively to protect that new foliage. And then just showing, I've got a picture of lilac powdery mildew here. In my last data slide, again, showing that nice combination of tourney with 3336 or thiophanate methyl working really well for control of powdery mildew. And I believe that is all the slides that I have, and I will turn it over to Andrew.
Thank you, Jill. We really appreciate your knowledge and you sharing it with us. I think that was great information. And just a reminder to anybody to click on the left side of your screen and download the PDF to make sure that you get everything as we go. So Andrew, I'm going to hand it over to you so you can tell us a little bit about the business side of plant healthcare.
All right. Thank you, Marisa. Well, I thought I'd start pretty basic here and just give you a little bit of information about who I am. Obviously, I'm Andrew Keppel. I'm the Lawn, Plant Healthcare, and General Tree Work Manager at McGinty Brothers Professional Lawn and Tree Care. We're a mid-sized, family-owned and operated company. We service all of Chicagoland. We're located in the northwest suburbs. I'm also an Illinois Certified Arborist, number IL4614A, and I'm a Certified Tree Care Safety Professional through the TCIA. Quite frankly, though, these things are important, but that's not what really matters. I've been in the tree care industry virtually my whole life. My dad's an arborist. My brother's an arborist. My first time being out on a site was when I was about 4 or 5 years old. So I've been learning this my whole life. I've now been operating the plant healthcare division of McGinty for the past 10 years. And the thing that I've found that is most important is that I continue to try new things. We try new things every year. Sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. But if you don't try, then you never know. So that's what we continue to do here. What I'm going to focus on today is where you should focus your efforts. A lot of these things work together. I think they're all important, not necessarily one over the other. They're all important together. We start with the office staff. That's where everything begins. That's oftentimes your client's first contact with you as a company. Then we move on to your sales process. Everyone that's out as an arborist or as a salesperson, which I'll use interchangeably, they need to be on the same page. They've got to have similar pricing and represent the goals of the company. That also goes for your field staff because they're your eyes, ears, and hands, quite frankly, after your salesperson has done their job getting out there and making sure that there's a good connection with your company and the client's needs. They're going to be the ones there more often. Then we move into the routing of work, which really goes directly with your field staff. I'll go into more detail on this, but if you have a large area that you work in, this is going to incredibly improve your margins. Then it comes down to equipment. That's kind of the final thing. Like I said, none of these are more important than the other. They just kind of went in this order. I think equipment, it's all about the quality. That's these trucks go out and they bring in pretty big dollars every day, so invest in them. So the first one we're going to start with then is office staff. Again, remember, this is your client's first point of contact. They have to get the information from the client that you need as a sales professional or as an arborist to gain that new client. They also begin this relationship primarily with your non-referred clients, people that are going to be calling into the office and not asking for anyone specific. And I'll get into this a little bit more down the line here, but they try to set an appointment. If the client wants to meet, we always try and set an appointment. It makes a huge difference. You've got to have your office staff trained and engaged in your business. This is kind of new for us, maybe the past 5-6 years, and we kind of came upon it on accident, which sometimes that's all right. We hired a new admin person, and she was really, really interested in learning about the actual tree care end of what we do. So I started teaching her, and so obviously they don't need to come in with it, but they do need to be willing to learn it because they can then answer simple questions that your clients call in and ask about, and it really gives the prospective client and existing clients confidence in your business. I mean, if the person answering the phone knows about what you're doing as a tree care professional, it really starts things off on the right foot. Moving on to having a solid software program with room to grow. This is important. This is something that we're actually working on right now to change over. We have an older system that's no longer being supported, so we're having to support it ourselves. Your office staff has to be really, really good with your software program. They need to know the ins and outs of it and how to operate it. I assume most people have some sort of system that they're using. The one that we're using now, it can help route the work. You can set timing dependencies. Again, kind of as Jill was talking about, we don't have time to go into detail on each thing, but those are all important to look at when you're either purchasing or upgrading your software. Then the thing that may seem obvious, but not always is the communication between your office staff and your entire PHC team is really, really important. Everyone on the team is going to get new information every day, so that information has to be available to everyone on the team. Oftentimes, the best way to achieve this is through notes in your software program. Other times, it's through phone calls, emails, text, whatever it is. It's just important that communication is there. It's going to work differently for every company, so you choose how, but it's really important. Everything, as Jill was talking about, everything is timing dependent. You know, everything has the products that we're putting out last for a certain amount of time. We've got to make sure that we're out there on time to get the second application or the third application or whatever it might be. So it's important that what's put into the computer is done immediately. This kind of touches back a bit to the software as well. With the communication between the office and the technicians, especially, the technicians can route their work through the software so the office knows where they are each and every day and kind of the route that they're taking. So if a client is to call in and say, hey, you know, John called me this morning or last night and said he was going to be out today, haven't seen him yet, then the office can say, oh, well, you know, you're the 15th person on his route today, so we should be there about 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock or whatever the case may be. Final thing in this part, and this kind of goes with other portions as well, is use the winter to your advantage. Here the winter is slow and not as busy. I'm not sure if every part of the country is that way, but we use that time to go through every single one of our accounts to make sure everything is updated. All the notes that needed to be put in are definitely put in the way they're supposed to. You can also update accounts with new services that you may be looking at proposing that are necessary for properties. And you put that in the renewal letter and notice that you send out, and you get those out to the clients. Another item that's great for the winter, obviously you have to know what you're doing, which I assume most of the people on the call here do. Visit your sites. It's a little harder in the winter, but have your arborist, have your salesperson out there checking the sites. You want to have them at least out there once a year. I know it's not always possible. You know, some of you may have 10 clients, some of you may have 2,000 clients. I don't really know. but you want to try and get out there at least once, not just your technicians. The client likes to see it, and obviously it's good for us too to know what's happening. So this leads me into if I get this to work right, there we go. Your sales staff, your sales process. Again, your sales people should be arborists. If not, they should be working on that. Well, we'll start with appointments. Again, this may seem obvious. Maybe everyone on the call is doing that, but we started encouraging appointments. In the past, we would just, if someone said, can I make an appointment, we would, but now we're encouraging it. We started doing that about 6-7 years ago, and it's been an incredible increase in closing sales. Some arborists, some salespeople are a little nervous to do that. You got to get over it. It makes such a difference. You can start building that relationship with the client, and now you're the face of the company, and you're not just the quote-unquote landscaper, just the tree guy. You're the arborist, you're the professional, you're who they come to. Make sure, with that, obviously you've got to make sure your staff knows what they're talking about. A lot of people have a hard time admitting when they don't, but if you're in doubt, go find out. The extension service, as was talked about earlier, there are plenty of other places. I use the Morton Arboretum also in this area if I'm not sure what something is. But it is so important that you don't make things up. It happens. And it's important that we as professionals try and make it not happen. So again, your certified arborist, it's a must. Use your certification number on your business card so people know, okay, this is a certified person. They know what they're talking about. Take advantage of your local ISA and or TCIA chapters. They put on so many events and so many great trainings. You should have definitely your arborists go, and it's a good idea to have your technicians go as well. You want to have joint meetings with your entire sales/arborist staff, if possible your technicians as well. In the early spring, this may happen more often than maybe in August, but everyone's got to talk about what's happening out there. Maybe it's just through an email chain, however you want to do it. Everybody is seeing different things on different properties, and in our area, the North Shore near the lake is going to be different than further out in the western suburbs. So you've got to see what's happening everywhere. So moving on a little bit here to this is kind of a touchy subject for some. Do not oversell your existing or prospective clients. Many clients are going to call in, and they may have one thing that they think they need, but they don't really know what's going on in their property. That's why they've called you. I've seen where some companies do try and oversell. Differentiate yourself from those by being a professional. Be upfront and tell them what they actually do need. It's going to build a trust level, and it's going to retain your clients, and it's going to build referrals, which in turn is going to build your business. Give them the options. Prioritize their needs. You may get out to a property. Excuse me. A little sip of water there. You may get out to a property and you see the need, whatever they probably called about. They may want certain things, and then there's some good-to-do items. You can prioritize them in that order and say, okay, this is what you absolutely need to do. This would be a great idea to do, and this long-term you should start doing maybe next year or the year after, depending on budgets. You've got your general things. You've got your fungicides, insecticides, fertilizations, dormant oils, those items. Each property is going to be different on what needs what. You may pick up one of those. Let's say it's the fungicide applications that you need. You'll pick that up, and then down the road you can build on these other items. Again, like I said before, this is going to make that client respect you and come to you as their go-to arborist. When they have a problem, they call you. They don't think of, oh, who should I call? Let me go on online somewhere and try and figure it out. No, they call you, which is good. You want to be in their cell phone. Manage the client's expectation. This goes back to some of the things that Jill was talking about. This is so important. We're often, almost always, only able to control things. We cannot cure everything out there. Sometimes people expect us to. We just have to be upfront with them, tell them the truth. This is what it is, and not only is that the case, but it's going to take 2 or 3 applications, and we're going to have to do it every year. You can liken it to the flu or other human problems that come up that the season comes up every year, and it's the same thing with our trees. By doing this, you're going to solve client concern calls down the road. And again, it goes back to retention. The higher retention rate that you have with your clients, the better. And it's just overall, you're doing a better job. That being said, you can't always do a better job than the other guy. So earlier this week, actually, I was on a prospective client's property. We do their lawn care, and they're looking at switching to us for their tree care as well. Someone else is doing it currently. And there was some rhizosphere, and it was being managed. There was just a little bit of it, and it wasn't bad. And I was very honest with the client. I said, hey, there's a little bit here. It looks like the other company is doing a good job of keeping it held back, but I can serve it to you in other ways. You've got to sell it in a different way at that point, which leads to follow through. I think all of us know that follow through is important. I think actually following through with the follow through is a challenge. So what I try and I set goals for myself, just like I do for my sales staff and my staff in the field. I try and call every client back within the same day. It's not always possible. I set a maximum goal of 24 hours. Another thing is checking back in with your outstanding proposals. We try to do this within 7 days. I have a folder system that every Monday I go through the previous week's Monday, and then every Tuesday I go through the previous week's Tuesday and try to call everyone back. Again, not always possible, but you try your best to get it done. And finally, with follow-through, do your absolute best to do what you said you would do. This goes back to your managing of the client's expectation. As long as you are being honest and truthful with them in the beginning, this should not be a difficult thing to achieve. Which leads me to your field staff and your technicians. You've got to have trained people on the front lines. I mean, this all goes back to everyone's got to know what they're doing when they're out there, from the top all the way down. You have to trust them. Not only do they have to know, but you have to trust them because they're the ones out there every day. They see your client more than you probably. They talk to your client, and they answer questions. So they've got to know what they're talking about when they're out there. They've got to know why they're there. I've met with prospective clients before that had other companies out, and they've told me, they had their technician out here. They were spraying. They didn't know why they were spraying. They said they were there to spray crab apples. I asked what for, and they didn't know. So that's obviously a problem, which leads to them needing to be able to communicate with the client what they're there to do. Even if they know, but they can't, they don't know the best way, or they're nervous, or whatever it is to speak with clients, they've got to be able to do that. Sorry, I switched this around a little bit, so I'm going out of order, but you've got to give yourself a break. This is when did I start doing this? This has been a while now, but use a PHC coordinator, PHC plant healthcare. What we've done is the person that is your head technician, so your best technician, advance them to be your PHC coordinator. They're going to put together weekly routes for your other technicians, and then I'll go into this later, but the technicians will do the daily routing, and they can keep inventory and inform purchasing when and what product is needed. They do all of the kind of day-to-day putting together of the crews. If people need to switch trucks for whatever reason, that kind of stuff, it really gives the management team time to focus on bigger picture items. Again, with communication, communication is always key, but we're looking here with the clients and the sales staff. We try to call ahead on every property that we go out to. If we're allowed to. Sometimes when you're working as a subcontractor, you're not, but we want to let the client know that we're going to be out there. You can call, email, text, whatever works for your client. When we arrive, we knock on the door. It seems simple, but sometimes people get a little ahead of themselves and just want to jump out and start spraying. And then, someone calls, oh, why is somebody in my backyard, whatever. Just it's a simple way to keep your clients happy. Sometimes they get annoyed and they ask you not to knock on their door, which I'd rather that than the other way around. The communication from your technicians to your office staff, a lot of times will be made through just notes on work orders, little things like, a tree was removed or a new problem's existing, things like that. That's got to be written on a work order so it gets into their account in the computer system. And then you add and reduce services as needed based on that. Another big thing that we've seen a change in is goals. We've got daily, weekly, and monthly goals, but this has very little to do with dollars. There is a production goal, obviously, but that's not the biggest thing here. We operate ours on an honor system, so we trust our technicians to be truthful. We provide a small reward, a gift card to a restaurant, $20, something like that. Nothing major. But it's about client care and generating some additional leads for our sales arborists. And by doing that, obviously you're retaining your clients because you're doing that client care. There are little things that need to be done that your sales arborist needs to get out there and check out. We've got every day is a training day. New technicians have to be trained in the field. In my opinion, that's the only way to do it. Depends on how much experience they have in order to know how long they're going to be trained. Hopefully shorter the better, but you've got to take the time that it needs, and your lead technician or PHC coordinator is going to be the one who does that, and they have to sign off on, okay, this person is ready to get out there and get the work done in the manner that your company requires. And I've said this a couple times, just about being honest. Your clients are going to thank you for this. You're going to thank yourself for this down the road. It's strange to me. People are not, and I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me. So I thought I'd throw it in there. That will bring us on to routing, which I'm sure everyone has some sort of routing system that they use. It could be very simple. It could be very advanced. The way that we do it is the plant health coordinator is going to set up your weekly routes. Again, like I said earlier, then your technician is going to do the daily route. They know the best way to route things. The technicians that are out there, they're doing it every day. They know where to go. They know the best way to do things. And again, this allows your managers and sales force to focus on that bigger picture. With this, you got to have the same technician on the same route. They go together. It doesn't work in every single case, but as long as 95% of the time it is, then you're doing pretty well. They help build a personal relationship between the company themselves and the client. They know where the property is located. It's easy to get there, and more importantly, sometimes where the trees are located. A lot of these properties are big, and you don't know where everything is. So that improves efficiency on how to pull the hose and where to go on the property first, and just little things like that improves your overall efficiency. They also know that they're responsible for keeping that property up. If there's a problem out there, they're going to be the first one who's asked, hey, why didn't you see this? Which leads to the next item with giving technicians ownership in the route. These properties are not just the company's client. This is the technician's client. They're responsible for that property. It really helps them take additional pride in what they do every day. And to encourage that, we empower the technicians to know their properties and their clients through simple, not even everyday items. Just ask them how their route is going. If it needs to be expanded or contracted or things like that. How the properties are looking. Little things like Mrs. Smith's Austrian pines. They were looking kind of rough at the beginning of the season. How are they looking now? Mr. Johnson, is his pool completed? Just whatever it is. They want to know that you care about the properties that they're servicing day to day. We get to really the meat of routing, and that's oftentimes GPS and mapping through your software. Our software doesn't connect with our GPS. Most of our trucks do have GPS, just kind of the window-mounted units. So we're still working through exactly how we're going to do this. But the software does route the work. So, like I said, every day the technician will put into our software, these are properties that I'm going today. It'll say the best route to take, and then it will be in the system so that the office knows, okay, John or Rick or whoever is going to be on these properties today. There's a ton of options out there that are available. I'm sure most of you have looked at some at a minimum. it really depends on your service area. Ours is kind of large, so GPS is more important. If you're in a small area, maybe it's not. That's obviously up to you. And the final topic that I wanted to touch on is equipment. You can go from something as simple as a pickup truck with a few $1,000 spray system that you can buy, all done for you that just slides in the back of the pickup truck, or you can spend over $100,000. It really depends on what your needs are. What we typically have, we have rigs that are meant only for plant healthcare. They're plant healthcare trucks, and that's it. Up until a few years ago, we still did have a few pickup trucks with the spray systems in them. Usually we've got about 600 to 800 gallons on a truck with anywhere from 1 to 3 tanks per truck. Really depends on exactly what the truck is doing. We have, usually it's 2 on one truck. We have 3 electric hose reels with 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch hoses. And I like to, and this is kind of something newer for us, I like to have a backpack sprayer on the truck. And this is for little things like if you're out there doing fungicide application and you notice, there's something, a little plum or something that has some borer damage, and you want to just get that treated for the client while you're there, you can note that on there. We don't even charge for that when we see that kind of thing because we're already there and we want to have good client service, but we do let that client know. When it gets to pumps, we have anywhere between 800 and 1,200 max PSI. That's way more than you could ever use or that we would ever use with the height of our trees here. But the stronger the pump, the longer it's going to last. We never get to the max PSI. So I also, again, a lot of this stuff is just experience that we've had. So maybe things are different for you. This is what works for me. Hopefully it works for you too. I prefer pumps that are not PTO driven. So I like an auxiliary pump for them. Reason being, oftentimes we'll be in parking lots or at HOAs where you may have 2 guys. One guy will drive and one guy will be on the walking, spraying at the same time. I just find that it lets you be a little bit more versatile. Move into quality. It's key with spray systems, spray guns, and quite frankly, everything else. When it comes to pumps, we use Meyer and Bean pumps. I'd like to consolidate that into one or the other, but this is where we're at now. And we always use plunger pumps. They last the longest. You can rebuild them easily. They're good pumps. When it comes to the guns, again, these are these equipment things that make your technician's job easier and just make the day just run a little easier for the guys out in the field. Again, we use Bean guns and we use a JD9, smaller guns that go on the 1/2 inch hose. I don't buy generic guns because, again, these are rebuildable. These things work very, very well. And it goes to product as well. Tourney happens to be a product that we use quite a bit, and it's a great product, but there are lots of good products out there. Make sure you find one that you like, that works well for you, and it's going to make your job easier to follow through with all the things that you told your client that you would do. Assigning trucks and guns and backpacks to your technician. Again, this may seem just very basic, but when we started doing this, it was amazing. Guns didn't disappear. The guns didn't break. They didn't get smashed. Backpacks didn't disappear. Trucks were clean all the time. You get really good reports on what's needed on all of your trucks. Everything just lasts longer this way. It's what we found to be the best. Hopefully, most people are doing that. I don't know, about 9 years ago, that was new for us. And the final thing in this item, as well as for my presentation, goes back to what I spoke on earlier, is use the winter and the off-season as your friend. Rebuild. You've got a lot of things that again, you want them to work. We, at least here, we only have about 8 months, depending on the season. Maybe we get lucky, we get 9 months, to generate income with your plant healthcare crews. Rebuild your pumps every other year potentially, or as needed. You at least want them gone through every year, every other year. Your guns, I would redo them every year. You can lose a whole day by having a gun explode through pressure. And train your technicians. Go back to that, like I said, for me, Morton Arboretum, your extension, your ISA, your TCIA, go to those places and get your technicians in there trained. It's great to have certified arborist technicians, but if nothing else, you at least want them to be in those classes learning. With that'll end my portion of the presentation, and I will hand it back over to Marisa.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. That was very informative. We really appreciate it. We have just a few minutes here for questions and answers. So I have the questions in hand that were asked before the webinar, and we also have had a few rolling in. So I'll just take this time to direct them to either Andrew or Jill, and if you have more, feel free to type them in. So the first one, Andrew, is the question actually that I have for you. You talked about the importance of quality, and also very early on you talked about how you always like to try new things. Can you just talk a little bit about how you determine or how you trial a new chemical product like a fungicide?
Well, usually we will talk a lot with our providers, the people that we purchase our chemicals from, to find out how it's been working with other people first. I like some other people to get it under their belt first sometimes. An example with that is like triage. I waited maybe a year and a half before I was fully confident in its abilities. And maybe I waited a little bit long on that one, but I would say trying new things is more so in the operations part of running the business as opposed to products. Products, I really want to know that the products work before putting them out in the field.
Okay, that makes sense. The next question is for you, Jill. We have a few questions coming in about powdery mildew, both on apple trees and on peonies. Do you have any recommendations there?
I'm hoping for the apple. They're either backyard fruit trees or they're some ornamentals or non-bearing. I cannot speak to products that would be used for bearing fruit trees just because that's just not my background. For any ornamentals, again, that list that I provided at the very beginning of the presentation, I believe most of those products have powdery mildew labeled on them. Tourney, of course, is a great product to use. There are other options as well. I do recommend for something like powdery mildew, however, doing a tank mix combination. For example, Tourney plus 3336 would be a really nice combination, and that's just to help minimize the development of fungicide resistance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Another more technical question. Which of the three practices is a more effective method of treating trees and shrubs? Microinjection, systemic injection, or contact spraying?
I can start on that. Andrew, you might be able to jump in too.
Yeah.
From my perspective, it's going to be based on what the target pest is. There are some wilt diseases, for example, oak wilt or Dutch elm disease, where you have to do some sort of trunk injection. And the same would be the case with, if you're talking about insecticide control, that's a completely different thing altogether. Andrew touched on, arbor jet injection. There are products, Safari is available as a basal trunk spray. It just all depends on the target. That's where I would start with that.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I primarily use foliar applications for fungicides. There are some injectables that are available. I haven't seen those work all that well, where I know that my foliar applications are. Insecticides, it really depends on what pest you're dealing with, but I would say I do a lot of soil treatment for systemic insecticides, and it obviously, again, depends on what, but do your research on the specific pest that you're going after. You've got to have every one of those tools in your toolbox in order to effectively have a good plant healthcare program.
Okay, great. Here's another one that could really be for either or both of you. Andrew, I don't know if you want to start first. Is there a phone app that we can use in the field to help diagnose tree and shrub diseases?
You know what? There is, and there are. There are plenty of them out there. I don't have one for recommendation. There are also all kinds of there are a lot of chemical companies and a number of other people that will put out little handouts, little pamphlet kind of things that your guys can carry around or that you can carry around. I don't have an app that I use, but I do know that I'm 99% sure Morton Arboretum has one. I should I should use one, but yeah.
Bill, do you have any thoughts on that? We do have one person who typed in the chat box to say that Purdue Tree Doctor is a great app.
Yeah, I have heard of the Purdue one. It's very good, but again, I still I don't know. I still recommend know your extension people, know your diagnostics people, because sometimes pictures can be deceiving. Sometimes you can overlook something. I still recommend people focus on diagnostic labs.
Okay, great. Let's see. Jill, are conifer blights transmittable through pruning cuts?
Some can be, certainly. If there's a conifer blight that causes a canker, absolutely. Definitely. Some can, some are not.
Okay. There is a question about fungus on crepe myrtle trees. The tree appears okay, but turning black. Any thoughts on it?
That's probably sooty mold, would be my guess. And if it is indeed sooty mold, it can look black and powdery. It's kind of, I guess, opposite of powdery mildew, because instead of white, it's kind of black and powdery and looks black. Usually that indicates an insect infestation, either mealybug or scale or aphids or something. That would be my thought on that one. Andrew, do you have any other insight? Maybe something?
That would be my first thought as well. It's as many things in our industry. It's hard to say just from a little description, but that would be my first guess.
Okay, great. Let's see. There's a couple more in here. Sorry, they keep loading, so I'm having trouble reading them off. How about there's a question, Jill, about the tank mix that you recommended with Turney. I lost the question now, but I saw it earlier. Can you elaborate on that?
The tank mix that I recommend is Turney plus 3336, and it allows you to use a lower rate of Turney. It's still within the labeled range, but it allows you to use a lower rate and still get some of the benefits of thiophanate methyl. And again, using two mode of action is just always a benefit. You can get some contact activity through the 3336 component and maximize Turney's residual. It's just a really nice mix. I've seen it do really well. I worked with our sales guy, Drew, out in the Northwest, and he was a strong proponent of that, and we've seen really good success with it on a wide range of diseases.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think that's important on a lot of diseases, not any one specific one.
Okay, and then the other question, kind of along the same topic, was can Turney be mixed with adjuvants or even Daconil?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Well, I think we covered most of them. Andrew or Jill, did you have any other comments or thoughts or questions for each other? Sometimes that happens with our speakers.
Well, I'll just throw out there that, I mean, obviously my contact info is up there if you did have a question that you didn't have a chance to have answered. I'm happy to answer any. I know I went through a lot of information that was just kind of quick and not detailed, so I'd be happy to answer any additional questions that way.
Yeah, me too. And thanks for the time. This has been great.
Okay, great. Well, we appreciate both of you participating very much, and just want to say thanks again to both of you and also to our sponsor, New Farm. So thank you, everybody. We went a few minutes over, but looks like most of the attendees hung on, so that's great news. And then Joelle just has a few closing comments, I believe.
Thank you for attending the Tree and Shrub Disease Control webinar. A recording of this webinar will be posted on the landscape management website. And also, because of the unexpected difficulty today's webinar, tomorrow, all registrants will receive an email with today's slides in an easy downloadable format. Please visit the landscape management website to register for Part 2 of the Build Your Business webinar series, Controlling Weeds in Landscape Beds, scheduled for Thursday, April 3rd. Thank you for attending and have a nice afternoon.